Captain Sarah Chen had survived worse situations than this, but as she watched her breath form small clouds in the frigid air of the alien research station, she wondered if this might be the one that finally killed her. The emergency beacon had been broadcasting for 3 standard days when her scout ship, the Meridian, finally tracked it to this ice-covered moon orbiting a gas giant in the outer rim of unexplored space. The station itself was a marvel of engineering that defied human understanding. Crystalline spires twisted impossibly skyward, their surfaces glowing with a soft blue luminescence that provided the only light in the perpetual twilight of the moon's surface. The architecture seemed to grow from the ice itself, as if the builders had convinced the frozen water to reshape itself according to their will rather than simply constructing on top of it. Sarah's environmental suit registered external temperatures of -47 degrees Celsius, well within the suit's operational parameters, but the heating system had been damaged during her rough landing. A piece of debris from the moon's orbital defense grid had clipped her ship's port wing, sending her into an uncontrolled descent that ended with the Meridian buried nose-deep in a snowdrift half a kilometer from the station. She had maybe 6 hours of emergency heating left in her suit's backup power cells. After that, the cold would begin its slow, methodical work of shutting down her body systems one by one. The thought should have terrified her, but Sarah Chen hadn't earned her captain's stripes by panicking in dangerous situations. Instead, she methodically worked through her options as she approached the station's main entrance. The massive doors were sealed, but her suit's scanners detected an atmosphere beyond them. More importantly, they detected movement. Someone, or something, was alive inside the station. Sarah activated her universal translator and began broadcasting on all standard frequencies. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Exploration Corps. I am requesting immediate assistance. My ship has been damaged and my environmental systems are failing. If anyone can hear this transmission, please respond." For several long minutes, there was nothing but static. Sarah was beginning to consider more desperate measures when the doors suddenly began to iris open with a sound like grinding crystal. Warm air rushed out, carrying with it scents that were completely alien yet somehow pleasant. Something like cinnamon mixed with ozone and fresh snow. The figure that emerged from the station made Sarah's breath catch in her throat, though whether from surprise or the increasingly thin air in her failing suit she couldn't say. The being was humanoid, but clearly not human. She stood perhaps 7 feet tall with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Her hair was white as fresh snow and fell in complex braids to her waist, interwoven with what looked like threads of pure silver. Most striking were her eyes, deep violet that seemed to hold the depth of space itself. She wore form-fitting garments that appeared to be woven from the same crystalline material as the station, providing coverage while somehow managing to look both practical and elegant. When she spoke, her voice was melodious, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but there was an underlying strength that suggested she was accustomed to being obeyed. "Human," she said, and Sarah's translator rendered the word with perfect clarity. "You are in distress." It wasn't a question, and Sarah found herself nodding before she remembered that the gesture might not translate across species. "My environmental systems are failing. I need shelter, or I'll freeze to death." The alien woman studied her for a moment, those violet eyes seeming to take in every detail of Sarah's condition. "I am Zarathes of the Kairathi Dominion. This is a research outpost studying the thermal dynamics of ice worlds. You may enter." Sarah didn't need to be told twice. She followed Zarathes through corridors that seemed carved from solid ice but somehow radiated warmth. The walls were covered in flowing scripts that glowed softly, providing both illumination and what Sarah guessed might be environmental data. The floor beneath her boots was smooth as glass but provided perfect traction, another impossible feat of alien engineering. "Your species has never been encountered before," Zarathes said as they walked. The Kirathi maintain extensive databases on all known sentient life. You are unusual. We call ourselves humans, Sarah replied, working to keep her voice steady despite the growing cold seeping through her suit's compromised systems. We're explorers. We came here following a distress signal. Zarathes stopped walking and turned to face her. There was no distress signal from this station. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. If there had been no distress signal, then what had drawn her here? The Meridian sensors were military-grade, designed to distinguish between genuine emergency beacons and everything from stellar phenomena to equipment malfunctions. She had been tracking a legitimate Terran emergency frequency. That's impossible, Sarah said. We've been following a standard Terran core emergency beacon for 3 days. The signal was definitely coming from this location. For the first time since their meeting, Zarathes showed something that might have been surprise. The slight widening of those violet eyes, the barely perceptible tilt of her head. Show me your readings. Sarah activated her suit's holographic display, projecting the sensor data into the air between them. The beacon's signal pattern was clearly visible, a steady pulse on frequency 447.2 megahertz, exactly as specified in Terran Core emergency protocols. But as she watched, Zarathes's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked distinctly like concern. This frequency, Zarathes said slowly, is used by Kirathi deep space monitoring stations to track vessels approaching our territorial boundaries. But this signal pattern... She paused, studying the display more carefully. This is a trap frequency. It is designed to lure ships to specific locations where they can be examined or destroyed. The implications hit Sarah like a cascade of ice water. Someone had been broadcasting a false emergency beacon using Terran protocols, but on a frequency that would alert Kirathi border guards. The question was whether it had been intended to draw humans into Kirathi space, or to make it appear that humans were violating their territorial boundaries. Who would do such a thing? Sarah asked, though she was already beginning to suspect the answer. The hegemony, Zarathes replied, confirming Sarah's fears. They seek to destabilize the balance of power between the great civilizations. If they could create an incident between the Kirathi and a previously unknown species. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah understood perfectly. First contact between two spacefaring civilizations was always a delicate matter. If it began with what appeared to be territorial violations and deception, it could easily escalate into conflict. The hegemony, whoever they were, had apparently decided that adding another war to the galaxy's already extensive collection would serve their purposes. How long before your people come looking for you? Zarathes asked. Sarah checked her suit's chronometer. The Meridian was supposed to check in with Fleet Command in 18 hours. When we don't report, they'll send a search and rescue team. Probably a full squadron, given that this is unexplored space. And they will follow the same false beacon that drew you here. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Sarah could already picture it. Terran warships dropping out of hyperspace, finding the wreckage of her scout ship and a Kirathi military installation. The Terran fleet commanders would assume the worst. There would be demands for answers, threats, possibly even immediate military action. All while the real culprits watched from a safe distance, ready to exploit the chaos they had created. We have to stop this, Sarah said. Zarathes studied her for a long moment. You would trust an alien you have known for mere minutes with the fate of your people. Sarah met those violet eyes without flinching. Do I have a choice? Besides, you're the one who told me about the trap. If you wanted to see my people destroyed, you could have just let me freeze outside. A sound escaped Zarathes that Sarah's translator couldn't parse, but which sounded almost like laughter. Perhaps your species is more interesting than our initial scans suggested. Very well, human Sarah Chen. We will work together to prevent this catastrophe. They had reached what appeared to be the station's central chamber, a vast space dominated by a pillar of crystalline growth that stretched from floor to ceiling. The pillar pulsed with shifting patterns of light, and Sarah realized she was looking at some kind of massive computer or communication system. Arrays of smaller crystals surrounded the central pillar, each one glowing with its own complex pattern of data. "This is our communication center," Zara Thess explained. "From here we can contact both your fleet and mine. But first, we must determine the exact nature of the deception that has brought you here." Sarah activated her suit's data interface and began transferring her sensor logs to one of the smaller crystals. The alien technology accepted the data stream without difficulty, another small miracle of universal engineering principles. As the information flowed into the Kyrathi system, new patterns began forming in the central pillar's display. "Fascinating," Zarathas murmured. "The false beacon is being generated by a cloaked vessel approximately 2 astronomical units from this moon. The signal is being carefully modulated to create the illusion that it originates from this station." Sarah studied the display, noting the complex orbital mechanics involved. "They're using the moon's gravitational field to bend the signal. Clever. From any approach vector, it would appear to be coming from the surface. More than clever. This required detailed knowledge of both Terran emergency protocols and Kyrathi territorial monitoring frequencies. The hegemony has agents within both our civilizations." The thought was sobering. Sarah had encountered the concept of infiltration and espionage in her military training, but this was the first time she had seen evidence of it operating on an interstellar scale. The implications for galactic security were staggering. "How do we expose them?" Sarah asked. Zarathas moved to one of the control crystals, her long fingers dancing across its surface in patterns that seemed more like art than technology. "We broadcast the truth on all frequencies. We show both our peoples the evidence of this deception before your search and rescue fleet arrives." It sounded simple, but Sarah could already see the flaws in the plan. "Will they believe us? A human captain and an alien scientist claiming that some mysterious third party is trying to start a war? It sounds like the kind of story someone would make up to cover their own crimes." "Then we must provide proof they cannot ignore." Zarathas's fingers moved faster across the crystal interface, and suddenly the chamber was filled with holographic displays showing the false beacon's true location, its signal analysis, and the orbital mechanics of the deception. But more than that, the displays began showing other instances, other false signals, other manipulated first contacts throughout the galaxy. "The hegemony has done this before," Zarathas explained. "Dozens of times across hundreds of star systems. They create conflicts between emerging civilizations, then exploit the chaos for their own expansion. Your arrival here may be the key to exposing their entire operation." Sarah stared at the evidence surrounding them. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. Entire civilizations had apparently been manipulated into conflicts that served no one but these mysterious puppet masters. How many wars had been fought based on lies? How many species had destroyed each other while the true enemy watched from the shadows? "We need more than evidence," Sarah said. "We need to catch them in the act." Zarathas turned to look at her, and for the first time since they had met, Sarah thought she detected approval in those alien features. "What do you propose?" "They're expecting your people and mine to start shooting at each other when my rescue fleet arrives. Instead, we give them a different kind of show. We broadcast our evidence, yes, but we also coordinate our response. Kyrathi and human ships working together to track down that cloaked vessel. A joint operation between species who met mere hours ago?" Zarathas shook her head. "The military commanders of both our fleets will never agree to such a plan. Then we don't give them a choice. We create facts on the ground that force cooperation." Sarah was already working through the logistics in her mind. The Meridian was damaged, but not destroyed. If she could get back to the ship and restore communications, she could contact the rescue fleet directly. Meanwhile, Zarathes could reach out to the Karathi authorities. If they moved fast enough, they could present both sides with a united front and evidence of the deception before anyone had time to make the wrong assumptions. "There is one problem with this plan," Zarathes said quietly. "The temperature outside this station is dropping rapidly. A storm system is moving in that will reduce surface temperatures to minus 70 degrees Celsius. Your environmental suit will not protect you for the journey back to your ship." Sarah checked her suit's diagnostics and felt her heart sink. The heating system was failing faster than she had expected. She had maybe 2 hours of partial protection left. Certainly not enough to make the trek back to the Meridian and complete the repairs needed to restore communications. "How long until the storm passes?" she asked. 14 hours, perhaps 16. Too long. Her rescue fleet would arrive in less than 12 hours, and by then the damage would be done. Unless... "Is there any other way to reach my ship? Underground tunnels? Some kind of vehicle?" Zarathes shook her head. "The research station was built for isolation. We have no surface vehicles, and the tunnels connect only to other research nodes kilometers away." They stood in silence for a moment, both understanding the impossible situation they faced. They had the evidence needed to prevent a disastrous first contact, but no way to act on it before it was too late. Then Zarathes spoke again, her voice carefully neutral. "There is one possibility. Karathi physiology is adapted for extreme cold. I could make the journey to your ship and assist with the repairs. But the storm will last through the night, and the station's emergency protocols will seal all entrances until it passes." "Meaning?" "Meaning that if I leave to help you, we will both be trapped outside during the worst of the storm. The temperature is too low. We'll need to share a bed," the alien woman stated firmly. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and necessity. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, grateful that her suit's helmet concealed her expression. She had trained for many scenarios during her years in the Exploration Corps, but sleeping beside an alien to survive a storm had never been covered in any manual. "You're talking about survival," Sarah said, wanting to be absolutely clear about what was being proposed. "Yes," Zarathes replied, though Sarah thought she detected something else in the alien woman's tone. "Body heat sharing is a standard survival technique. My people's core temperature runs several degrees higher than baseline human norms. Combined with proper insulation and shelter construction, we could both survive until the storm passes." It was logical. It was practical. It was also utterly terrifying in ways that had nothing to do with the cold or the storm, or even the impending diplomatic crisis. Sarah found herself studying Zarathes's face, noting the elegant bone structure, the way her pale blue skin seemed to glow with its own inner light, the intelligence that shone in those violet eyes. "And after we survive the storm?" Sarah asked. "After we survive the storm, we prevent a war." Sarah took a deep breath, tasting the alien air that somehow managed to smell like home, despite being produced by technology she couldn't begin to understand. The decision, when it came, was easier than she had expected. "Then we better get started." The journey to the Meridian proved to be an exercise in controlled desperation. Zarathes had provided Sarah with additional thermal layers crafted from the same crystalline material as her own garments, but even with the alien technology supplementing her failing environmental suit, the cold bit through every layer with relentless efficiency. The storm had arrived early, turning the moon's already hostile surface into a nightmare of driving snow and winds that howled like the voices of the damned. Visibility dropped to mere meters, forcing them to navigate by the faint electromagnetic signature of Sarah's crashed ship. Zarathes moved through the blizzard with an easy grace that spoke of genetic adaptation to harsh environments, while Sarah stumbled forward on increasingly numb legs, fighting to keep pace. "Your vessel's hull is intact," Zarathes called over the wind as they finally reached the crash site. "The damage appears to be confined to the port wing and main drive assembly." Sarah could barely make out the familiar outline of the Meridian through the swirling snow, but what she could see confirmed Zarathes's assessment. The scout ship had been designed to withstand much worse abuse than a rough landing. Getting inside would be the easy part. The challenge would be restoring enough power to the communication system to reach her fleet before they jumped into what they thought was a hostile situation. The ship's emergency airlock still functioned, cycling them through into blessed warmth that felt like a physical embrace. Sarah's environmental suit immediately began registering normal atmospheric conditions as the Meridian's life support systems kicked in. For the first time since landing on this frozen moon, she could breathe easily. "Impressive," Zarathes said, examining the ship's interior with obvious interest. "Your people favor function over aesthetics, but the engineering principles are sound. This vessel could easily support twice its rated crew complement." Sarah was already moving toward the communications console, running diagnostic checks and assessing the damage. "The Exploration Corps builds ships for long-duration missions in unknown territory. Redundancy and reliability are more important than comfort." She paused, reading the diagnostic results. "The primary communication array is offline, but the backup system is functional. I can reach my fleet, but the signal strength will be limited. Range? Maybe 2 light years under optimal conditions. Less in this storm." Sarah's fingers moved across the control interfaces with practiced efficiency. "The rescue fleet should be within that range by now. The question is whether they'll believe what we tell them." Zarathes had moved to one of the secondary stations and was studying the displays with obvious fascination. "Your technology operates on different principles than ours, but the underlying mathematics are elegant. May I access your sensor logs?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. If they were going to prevent a war, they would need to trust each other completely. "Go ahead. The interface should adapt to your physiology." As if to prove her point, the console's touch-sensitive controls began glowing with a soft blue light that matched the luminescence of Zarathes's skin. The alien woman's fingers moved across the interface with increasing confidence, calling up displays and data streams that painted a detailed picture of the false beacon's operation. "Remarkable," Zarathes murmured. "Your sensors detected quantum fluctuations in the beacon signal that our systems missed. The cloaked vessel is using a technology we have not encountered before." Sarah looked up from her own work. "What kind of technology?" "Temporal manipulation. They are broadcasting the false beacon from several nanoseconds in the past, creating a causal loop that makes the signal appear to originate from multiple locations simultaneously. Very sophisticated, very expensive, and very dangerous." The implications hit Sarah like a cold wave. Temporal manipulation was theoretical technology, the kind of thing that existed in academic papers and wild speculation about ancient civilizations. If the hegemony had access to such capabilities, they were dealing with a threat far greater than simple political manipulation. "How dangerous?" Sarah asked. "Used incorrectly, temporal technology can create paradoxes that unravel cause and effect across entire star systems. The fact that they are willing to employ it for a relatively minor deception suggests either desperate circumstances or staggering arrogance." Sarah turned back to her communication array, working to boost the signal strength through creative routing of the ship's remaining power. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the Meridian's hull, creating a constant background drumming that made the interior feel like the inside of a metal drum. The ship's structural integrity was holding, but she could feel the vessel shifting slightly as wind gusts hit the exposed surfaces. "I've got a connection," Sarah announced. "Signal strength is marginal, but I should be able to reach Fleet Command." The response came faster than she had expected, confirming her suspicion that the rescue fleet was already closer than anticipated. Admiral Morrison's gruff voice crackled through the static, carrying with it all the authority and concern she had come to associate with her commanding officer. "Captain Chen, report your status immediately. We've been tracking that emergency beacon for 16 hours and are preparing for orbital insertion." "Admiral, listen carefully," Sarah replied. "The emergency beacon is a fake. I repeat, the beacon is a hegemony deception designed to create a first contact incident. Do not approach the Kirathi research station with weapons active." There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of storm winds battering the ship's hull. When Morrison's voice returned, it carried a distinctly skeptical tone. "Captain, explain your situation. Are you under duress? Are you being coerced by hostile forces?" Sarah had expected this reaction. From the Admiral's perspective, she had been missing for hours and was now claiming that an emergency beacon was fake while apparently in contact with unknown aliens. Under normal circumstances, he would be right to assume coercion or worse. "Negative, Admiral. I am aboard the Meridian, with a Kirathi scientist named Zarathes. We have uncovered evidence of a hegemony operation designed to manipulate both our species into conflict. I am transmitting the sensor data now." Sarah activated the data stream, sending the evidence they had gathered to the fleet's analysis computers. But even as the information flowed through the communication link, she knew it might not be enough. Data could be fabricated. Sensor readings could be manipulated. The Admiral would need something more convincing than electronic evidence. "Admiral," Zarathes spoke into the communication pickup, her melodious voice somehow cutting through the static with perfect clarity. "I am Zarathes of House Veltar, Fourth Circle researcher for the Kirathi Dominion. I formally request parley under the Galactic Accords for the prevention of interstellar conflict." Another pause, this one even longer than the first. Sarah could imagine the frantic activity aboard the flagship as communication specialists tried to verify the legitimacy of the formal request and legal experts consulted the relevant treaties and protocols. "This is Admiral Morrison of the Terran Exploration Corps," came the eventual reply. "I acknowledge your request for parley. However, I must inform you that we are currently tracking what appears to be a significant military buildup in this system. Multiple vessels on intercept courses with our position." Sarah and Zarathes exchanged glances. This was exactly what they had hoped to prevent. Both fleets moving into position based on false assumptions and incomplete information. "Admiral, those vessels are likely Kirathi Border Patrol responding to what they perceive as an incursion into their territory," Sarah said. "We need to coordinate communication between both fleets before someone makes a mistake we can't take back." "And how exactly do you propose we do that, Captain? We have no established diplomatic channels with this Kirathi Dominion." Before Sarah could respond, Zarathes stepped forward. "Admiral Morrison, I am initiating a multi-frequency broadcast to both our fleets. I suggest your communication specialists monitor frequency 2847.6 MHz for real-time translation protocols." The alien woman moved to another console, her fingers dancing across controls that Sarah was beginning to recognize as some kind of quantum communication system. The ship's displays flickered as alien code interfaced with human technology, creating new pathways for information exchange. "Kirathi Battle Group Veltar, this is Research Station Epsilon 7, Zarathes spoke in her own language, which Sarah's translator rendered in real time. "I am transmitting priority intelligence regarding hegemony infiltration operations. Request immediate conference with Fleet Command Authority." The response came in rapid musical syllables that spoke of military precision and barely controlled aggression. Sarah didn't need a translation to understand that the Kirathi fleet was taking a very dim view of human vessels appearing in their territory without warning. "Battle Group Commander Thektar acknowledges," the translation provided. "Research Station Epsilon 7. Explain the presence of alien vessels in Dominion space. Explain the disruption of border monitoring systems. Explain why you are not responding to standard security protocols. Zarathus's reply was calm but firm. Commander, we have uncovered evidence of hegemony temporal manipulation technology being used to create false first contact scenarios. The human vessels are responding to fabricated distress signals. I am declaring this a Category 7 security incident requiring immediate joint investigation. Sarah watched the displays as both fleets reacted to this development. The human vessels had dropped out of hyperspace at maximum safe distance from the moon, their formation suggesting readiness for combat, but not immediate aggression. The Karathi ships were holding position at the edge of the system's gravity well, but their energy signatures indicated fully charged weapon systems. Both fleets are maintaining defensive postures, Sarah observed. That's good news. It means both sides are willing to talk before they start shooting. For now, Zarathus agreed, but military commanders are trained to prepare for the worst possible scenario. If we cannot provide conclusive proof of the deception soon, caution will give way to preemptive action. Sarah was already working on that problem, using the ship's sensors to track the cloaked vessel that was generating the false beacon. The temporal manipulation made it difficult to maintain a lock on the target, but the quantum fluctuations Zarathus had identified provided a signature they could follow. I've got the bogey, Sarah announced, range approximately 1.7 astronomical units bearing 274 Mark 8. It's definitely using temporal shielding, but the effect is creating detectable gravitational anomalies. Admiral Morrison's voice crackled through the communication link again. Captain Chen, we're reading your target data. Recommend immediate investigation with full squadron support. Admiral, request permission to coordinate with Karathi forces for joint reconnaissance mission. We need both fleets working together to penetrate their cloaking technology. The request was met with silence. Sarah could imagine the heated discussion taking place aboard the flagship as military advisors debated the wisdom of trusting an unknown alien species with human lives and technology. From their perspective, it would seem like madness. Zarathus spoke into the communication pickup again. Admiral Morrison, I understand your reluctance to trust an unknown species. However, I offer myself as a guarantee of Karathi good faith. I will accompany your reconnaissance mission aboard a human vessel. That's not necessary, Sarah said quickly. Admiral, I volunteer to lead the reconnaissance mission. The Meridian is damaged but still space-worthy. We can investigate the bogey and transmit real-time data to both fleets. Absolutely not, Captain. Your ship is in no condition for a combat mission. With respect, Admiral, this isn't a combat mission. It's an intelligence-gathering operation, and right now, the Meridian is the only vessel in this system with a crew that includes both human and Karathi personnel. Sarah could hear the wind outside beginning to quiet, suggesting that the storm was finally starting to pass. Soon, they would need to make their move. Both fleets were maintaining their current positions, but that wouldn't last long. Military commanders hated uncertainty, and without concrete evidence of the deception, they would eventually be forced to treat each other as potential threats. Admiral, Zarathus said, I am transmitting technical specifications for Karathi sensor enhancement protocols. If your vessels implement these modifications, they will be able to penetrate temporal shielding. The process requires approximately 30 minutes for installation and calibration. And why should we trust alien technology installed in our ships? Morrison asked bluntly. Because, Admiral, the alternative is likely to be war between our peoples based on lies created by a third party that seeks to profit from our mutual destruction. The truth of those words hung in the air, like a physical presence. Sarah found herself studying Zarathus's profile as the alien woman worked at the communication console, noting the determined set of her shoulders and the quiet confidence in her movements. In the space of a few hours, this strange being had become not just an ally, but someone Sarah was beginning to trust with her life and the lives of countless others. "Captain Chen," Admiral Morrison said finally, "what is your assessment of the situation?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words might determine whether two species found peace or war. "Admiral, I believe the Kirathi are genuinely committed to preventing this conflict. Zarathes has risked her own safety to help me reach my ship and contact our fleet. She's providing us with technology that could give us a significant tactical advantage. If this were a deception, it would be the most elaborate and self-defeating one in military history." Another long pause. When Morrison spoke again, his voice carried the weight of command decision. "Very well, Captain. You are authorized to proceed with joint reconnaissance mission. But Captain Chen, if this goes sideways, you and your alien friend are going to have a lot of explaining to do." "Understood, Admiral." Sarah began the process of bringing the Meridian systems back online, working around the damaged components with practiced efficiency. The ship would never win any speed records in its current condition, but it would fly. More importantly, it would serve as a neutral platform for the investigation that might prevent a war. "The storm is passing," Zarathes observed, checking the external sensors. "We should depart within the next hour to maintain optimal approach trajectory." Sarah nodded, then paused in her preparations. "Zarathes, there's something I need to ask. Earlier, you said we might need to share body heat to survive the storm. Was that really about survival, or were you testing me somehow?" The alien woman turned to face her, those violet eyes holding an expression Sarah couldn't quite interpret. "Your species is very direct. I find this refreshing. Yes, body heat sharing would have been necessary for survival, but I will admit that I was also curious about human reactions to close contact with unknown species. Your willingness to trust me in such vulnerable circumstances suggested that your people might be capable of true cooperation rather than mere alliance of convenience." "And what did you conclude?" Zarathes smiled, an expression that transformed her already striking features into something genuinely beautiful. "I concluded that humans are either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish, possibly both. But I also concluded that if we can prevent this war, our species might have much to learn from each other." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the ship's life support systems. "I think I'd like that." Outside, the last of the storm winds were dying away, leaving behind a crystalline silence that seemed to hold infinite possibility. In a few hours, they would know whether their efforts had been enough to prevent a tragic first contact. But for now, in the warm confines of the Meridian, two beings from different worlds prepared to take the first steps toward a future neither could have imagined when the day began. "Ready?" Sarah asked, her hand hovering over the engine ignition controls. "Ready," Zarathes replied. The Meridian lifted off into the alien sky, carrying with it the hopes of two civilizations and the dreams of two individuals who had found something unexpected in the frozen wastes of a distant moon. The approach to the cloaked vessel proved to be more challenging than Sarah had anticipated. Even with the Kirathi sensor enhancements installed aboard both the Meridian and the lead vessels of each fleet, the temporal shielding created a maze of false readings and phantom contacts that made navigation treacherous. "The hegemony vessel is definitely using technology beyond what we've encountered before," Zarathes reported from the co-pilot station. She had adapted to the human control interfaces with remarkable speed, her long fingers dancing across the displays with an efficiency that would have impressed any veteran pilot. "The temporal displacement is creating chronon particles that interfere with conventional sensor arrays." Sarah adjusted their approach vector, using the gravitational anomalies they had detected earlier as a guide through the interference field. Behind them, the joint fleet maintained formation at a respectful distance, close enough to provide support if needed, but far enough to avoid triggering whatever automated defenses the hidden ship might possess. "Range to target, 5,000 kilometers and closing," Sarah announced. "Both fleets report ready status." The communication channel crackled with voices from both human and Kyrathi commanders, the real-time translation protocols creating an oddly musical harmony of different languages and inflections. Despite the tension of the situation, Sarah found herself marveling at how quickly the two military forces had adapted to working together. Professional competence, it seemed, was truly universal. "Contact," Zarathes called out suddenly. "The cloaking field is fluctuating. I'm detecting massive power drain from their temporal generators." On the main display, space itself seemed to shimmer and bend as the hidden vessel fought to maintain its concealment. Sarah could see brief glimpses of hull plating and drive signatures, like looking at something underwater that kept shifting position just as her eyes tried to focus on it. "They know we're here," Sarah said. "The question is, what they plan to do about it." Her answer came in the form of energy beams that suddenly materialized from apparently empty space, targeting not the Meridian, but the larger fleet vessels hanging back in support formation. The shots were precisely aimed, designed to disable rather than destroy, but their message was clear. The hegemony vessel wanted to create an incident that would force both fleets into combat. "All vessels, evasive maneuvers," Sarah broadcast on all frequencies. "Do not return fire. Repeat, do not return fire. Target is attempting to provoke hostile response." The discipline of both fleets was remarkable. Despite taking fire from an unseen enemy, the human and Kyrathi commanders held their positions and maintained communications protocols. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her own species, mixed with growing respect for their new alien allies. "Sarah," Zarathes said quietly, "I am detecting massive temporal buildup from the hegemony vessel. They are preparing to activate some kind of chronological weapon." The words sent ice through Sarah's veins. Temporal weapons were purely theoretical, the kind of technology that existed only in the nightmares of physicists and the fevered dreams of military strategists. If the hegemony actually possessed such devices, they could potentially erase their enemies from history itself. "What's the target?" Sarah asked, though she was already afraid she knew the answer. "Both fleets. They are attempting to create a temporal paradox that will prevent this first contact from ever occurring. If they succeed, our species will never meet. The evidence of their deception will never be discovered, and they will be free to continue their manipulations elsewhere." Sarah's hands moved across the control interfaces with desperate efficiency, pushing the damaged Meridian toward the hegemony vessel at maximum acceleration. If they could disrupt the temporal weapon before it fired, both fleets might survive. If they failed, two civilizations would be wiped from existence without ever knowing what had happened to them. "Admiral Morrison, Kyrathi Battle Group Commander, this is Captain Chen," she broadcast on emergency frequencies. "Target vessel is preparing to deploy temporal weapons. All ships jump to minimum safe distance immediately. Repeat, emergency withdrawal to minimum safe distance." The response from both fleets was immediate and professional. Hyperspace windows began opening as ships prepared to retreat beyond the range of whatever exotic weapon the hegemony vessel was charging. But Sarah knew it wouldn't be enough. Temporal weapons operated outside normal space-time, and distance might not provide protection from effects that could rewrite causality itself. "There has to be a way to stop them," Sarah muttered, studying the sensor readings for any weakness in the enemy vessel's defenses. "There is," Zarathes said quietly. "Temporal weapons require precise calibration to function safely. If we can overload their chronon generators with a feedback pulse, the temporal field will collapse and destroy their ship." Sarah looked at her alien companion, noting the grim expression on those elegant features. "What's the catch?" The feedback pulse must be generated from within their temporal field. A ship would have to approach close enough to be caught in the chronon matrix, then overload their own temporal shielding to create the necessary resonance cascade. The implications were clear. It was a suicide mission. Whoever flew into the temporal field would be caught in the same paradox that destroyed the enemy vessel. They would cease to exist not just in the present, but throughout all of history. "I'll do it," Sarah said without hesitation. "The meridian is already damaged. If I can modify our sensor array to generate the feedback pulse—" "No." Zarathus's voice carried an authority that stopped Sarah mid-sentence. "This is a Kirathi temporal technology problem. It requires Kirathi expertise to resolve. And besides," she added with something that might have been a smile, "you promised me that we would prevent this war together." Sarah stared at her for a long moment, understanding what Zarathus was proposing. Not a suicide mission for one, but for both of them, together. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked. "There might be another way. We could—" "Sarah Chen," Zarathus interrupted. "In my language, there is a concept that translates roughly as the moment when strangers become family. It occurs when two beings choose to face death together rather than live apart. I believe this may be such a moment." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that spread through her entire being, despite the cold logic of their situation. In the space of a single day, she had gone from being a solitary explorer to being part of something larger than herself. The thought of losing that connection, of losing Zarathus, was almost unbearable. But the thought of losing both their peoples was worse. "Then we do this together," Sarah said. "How do we modify the sensor array?" Working with desperate efficiency, they began rewiring the Meridian's sensor systems to generate the temporal feedback pulse. It was delicate work, requiring precise calibration of quantum field generators and careful integration of human and Kirathi technologies. Outside their hull, space continued to shimmer and bend as the hegemony vessel charged its temporal weapon. "Chronon cascade in 45 seconds, Zarathus reported. "Both fleets have withdrawn to minimum safe distance, but I do not believe it will be sufficient protection." Sarah made the final connections in the sensor array, her hands moving with the steady precision that years of military training had ingrained in her nervous system. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. There would be time for terror later, if there was a later. "Feedback pulse ready," she announced. "What's our approach vector?" "Direct frontal assault," Zarathus replied. "We need to penetrate their temporal field as deeply as possible before triggering the cascade. Maximum acceleration, minimum evasive action." Sarah nodded and engaged the Meridian's engines at full power. The damaged ship responded sluggishly, but it moved forward with the inexorable determination of a bullet seeking its target. Around them, space itself began to distort as they approached the edge of the temporal field. 20 seconds to chronon cascade," Zarathus announced. "Sarah, I want you to know—" "Don't," Sarah interrupted. "Whatever you're going to say, save it for after we survive this. We're going to have a lot to talk about once we prevent this war." Zarathus looked at her with those remarkable violet eyes, and Sarah saw something in them that transcended species barriers. Understanding, affection, hope. "Yes," Zarathus said simply. "We will." The meridian pierced the temporal field like a needle through silk, reality bending and flowing around them in ways that made Sarah's eyes water and her brain ache. Through the distortion, she could see the hegemony vessel, no longer cloaked, its hull gleaming with exotic materials that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. 10 seconds, Zarathus called out. Initiating feedback pulse. The sensor array activated with a sound like crystal chimes in a hurricane. Energy flowed through the modified systems, creating patterns of force that reached out toward the enemy vessel's temporal generators. For a moment, Nothing happened. Then space screamed. The temporal field collapsed in on itself with the force of a small black hole, dragging the hegemony vessel into a vortex of twisted space-time. Sarah felt the meridian being pulled inexorably toward the same fate, the ship's structure groaning under stresses that physics hadn't invented names for. "Emergency power to structural integrity," she shouted over the sound of reality tearing itself apart. "Reroute all available energy to the temporal shielding." Zarathus's fingers flew over the alien control systems, channeling power through pathways that shouldn't have existed, but somehow did anyway. The ship bucked and twisted as competing forces tried to tear it apart on the molecular level, but the combined human and Karathi technologies held together through what could only be called a miracle of cooperative engineering. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos stopped. Space returned to its normal configuration, stars resuming their proper positions, and the laws of physics reasserted their authority over local reality. Where the hegemony vessel had been, there was now nothing but a faint shimmer of exotic particles slowly dispersing into the vacuum. "Status report," Sarah called out, her voice hoarse from shouting over the temporal storm. "All systems operational," Zarathus replied, though Sarah could hear the amazement in her voice. "Hull integrity holding. We are alive." On the communication channels, voices from both fleets erupted in celebration and relief. The joint operation had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. Not only had they prevented a war between their peoples, but they had eliminated a threat that might have destabilized the entire galaxy. "Captain Chen," Admiral Morrison's voice cut through the celebration, "please report to Fleet Command for immediate debriefing. And, Captain, outstanding work." Similar congratulations flowed from the Karathi fleet, though the musical language made the praise sound like poetry, even through the translation systems. Sarah found herself grinning despite the exhaustion that was beginning to set in. "What happens now?" she asked Zarathus, as they prepared to dock with the flagship. "Now we write the first chapter of a new kind of history," Zarathus replied. "A history based on cooperation rather than conflict, understanding rather than fear." She paused, looking at Sarah with an expression that spoke of possibilities neither of them had imagined when this day began. "And perhaps," she continued quietly, "we explore what it means for two beings from different worlds to choose each other over all the vast emptiness between the stars." Sarah felt that warmth in her chest again, stronger now, fed by hope and affection and the deep satisfaction of a job well done. Outside the Meridian's viewports, human and Karathi vessels moved together in perfect formation, their crews working as one to secure the area and begin the process of formal first contact. It was, she realized, exactly the kind of future worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary, but even better worth living for. "I'd like that very much," Sarah said. 3 months later, the formal signing of the Human-Karathi Cooperation Accord took place aboard a joint research station constructed in the same system where their peoples had first met. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, human practicality merged with Karathi aesthetics to create something neither species could have built alone. Captain Sarah Chen, now serving as the first human ambassador to the Karathi Dominion, stood beside Ambassador Zarathus of House Veltar as representatives from both civilizations celebrated the historic agreement. The ceremony was being broadcast throughout human and Karathi space, marking the beginning of what historians would later call the era of galactic cooperation. "Any regrets?" Zarathus asked quietly as the formal presentations continued around them. Sarah looked out through the station's crystal windows at the stars beyond, noting the mixed fleet of human and Karathi vessels that now patrolled the border regions together, hunting for any remaining hegemony infiltrators. "Just one," Sarah replied. "I regret that we never did get to share that bed." Zarathus laughed, the sound like silver bells in a gentle breeze. Perhaps we should remedy that situation. In the interest of continued diplomatic cooperation, of course. Of course, Sarah agreed, fighting to keep her expression diplomatically neutral. Purely in the interest of interspecies relations. That evening, as the formal ceremonies gave way to more private celebrations, Sarah and Zarathes found themselves alone in the ambassador's quarters, looking out at a view that encompassed 2 worlds, 2 fleets, and infinite possibilities. The temperature, Sarah noted with amusement, was perfectly comfortable, but some traditions, once established, deserved to be maintained. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "it's been a long day, and space can be so cold and lonely. Perhaps we should consider sharing body heat, for diplomatic reasons." Zarathes's smile could have powered a small star. "I believe," she said, moving closer, "that would be an excellent diplomatic initiative." Outside their window, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, and somewhere in the vast space between them, 2 civilizations continued their first steps toward a shared future. But inside the warm confines of the ambassador's quarters, 2 individuals who had found something precious in the cold void of space began their own exploration of what it meant to choose love over fear, cooperation over conflict, and hope over despair. The universe, Sarah reflected as Zarathes's arms enfolded her, was a much warmer place when you didn't have to face it alone. And sometimes, the best diplomatic solutions were also the most personal ones.